Le passé composé, les verbes irréguliers, partie 2. The past tense with irregular verbs. In this video, we'll talk about the past tense in French with irregular verbs. We'll start off with an overview of the past tense in English. Then we'll go into the construction of le passé composé des verbes irréguliers. There will be some guided practice and then independent practice at the end. English has a variety of ways of expressing the past tense. You can say I talked, you can say I did talk, or you could say I have talked. In French, the third way, I have talked, is used most to express the past tense. To create le passé composé in French, you use the appropriate form of avoir, which means to have, and here are the forms. J'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. And the ed form, or in grammar speak, the past participle of your verb. Typically, er verbs change to e accent aigu. Re verbs change to you, and ir verbs change to I. There are several verbs, however, that do not follow this pattern. They're irregular verbs. That is to say, they have their own unique ed form, their own unique past participle form, even though they may end in er, even though they may end in re, and even though they may end in ir. So these verbs, despite whatever ending they have, change to you. So lire becomes le, avoir becomes eu, savoir becomes su, pouvoir becomes pu, voir becomes vu, croire becomes cru, recevoir reçu, vouloir voulu. These verbs are irregular. So even though, for instance, avoir ends in ir, it changes completely into u. Even though savoir ends in ir, it changes to su, as goes with the rest of the verbs. These verbs are also irregular, and they change to is. Prendre changes to pris. Comprendre changes to compris. Apprendre changes to appris. And mettre changes to mis. Even though they end in re, and traditionally re verbs change to you, these verbs are irregular. Therefore, they have their own unique past participle, or ed form. Dire becomes dit, écrire becomes écrit. Ces verbes sont très irréguliers. Être change à été, ouvrir change à ouvert, et faire change à fait. Remember, even though they may end in re or ir or er, these verbs are irregular and have their own special past participle, or ed form. So to review, to create the past tense in French, you need the appropriate form of avoir and the ed form, or the past participle of your verb. Traditionally, er verbs change to e accent aigu, re verbs change to you, and ir verbs change to I. However, as we've just covered, there are a handful of verbs that have a unique ed, or past participle form. So let's take the example j'ai lu. J'ai lu means I have read, or it can also mean I read or I did read. To create le passé composé, or the past tense in French, you need the appropriate form of avoir, which we have, j'ai lu, as well as the ed form of the past participle of your verb. Typically, er changes to e accent aigu, re changes to u, and ir changes to I. However, there are a handful that have a unique ed, or past participle form, like lu. Because remember, lire changes to lu. Let's take this other example. J'ai vu. J'ai vu means I have seen. It can also mean I saw or I did see. To create the past tense, le passé composé in French, you need your appropriate form of avoir, which we have, j'ai, as well as the ed form or the past participle of your verb. As we discussed, there are a handful of verbs like voir that have a unique ed or past participle form. Voir becomes vu because it's irregular. Let's take another example. J'ai eu, which means I have had, or I had, or I did have. To create le passé composé, or the past tense in French, you need the appropriate form of avoir, which we have, j'ai, as well as the ed, or past participle, of your form. There are a handful of verbs, like avoir, that have their unique ed or past participle form. That is to say, they do not follow the standard er to e accent aigu, re to u, and ir to I. Avoir simply changes to u. J'ai pris. J'ai pris means I have taken. It can also mean I took or I did take. To create the past tense in French, le passé composé, you need your appropriate form of avoir, which we have, j'ai, and the ed form of the past participle of your verb. There are a handful of verbs, however, like prendre, that have their own unique ed form, or their own past participle form. Prendre is an irregular verb, therefore it's unique, and goes simply from prendre to pris. J'ai compris. I have understood, or I understood, or I did understand. To create the passé composé in French, you need your appropriate form of avoir, which we have, j'ai, as well as your ed form or your past participle of your verb. Comprendre has its own unique ed or past participle form, compris. Therefore, it's j'ai compris. J'ai mis. J'ai mis can mean I have placed or I have worn. This verb has several different meanings. To create le passé composé, you need your appropriate form of avoir, which you have, j'ai, as well as your ed or past participle form. Mettre is irregular. It does not follow the standard rules of er to e accent aigu, re to u, or ir to I. Mettre changes simply to me. So you have j'ai mis. J'ai écrit, I have written. I wrote or I did write. To create le passé composé, you need your form of avoir, j'ai, as well as the ed form or the past participle of your verb. Écrire is irregular. It has its own unique ed or past participle form. Therefore, écrire becomes écrit. J'ai fait. J'ai fait means I have done, I did, or I did do. To create le passé composé in French, you need the appropriate form of avoir, j'ai, as well as the ed form of the past participle of your verb. Faire is irregular. It has its own unique ed or past participle form. You go from faire to fait. Here's some guided practice for us to look at the passé composé in context in sentences. Hier, j'ai lu Hunger Games à la bibliothèque. Yesterday, I read Hunger Games at the library. You can also translate this to mean I did read Hunger Games or I have read Hunger Games. Hier, j'ai vu Jean avec son ami Marie au lac. Hier, il a reçu un A sur l'examen. Notice how we have our appropriate form of avoir, il a, and then our past participle or our ed form. Reçu is the irregular ed form of the verb recevoir, which means to receive. Hier, elles ont pris une baguette pour mon déjeuner. Notice how we have the appropriate form of avoir, ont, elles ont, and then our past participle, pris. Pris is the ed form or the past participle form of the verb prendre. Hier, tu n'as pas compris les instructions pour la répétition guidée. As an aside, notice how the ne pas goes around avoir, your auxiliary verb. Hier, nous avons écrit un narratif pour le cours de français. Hier, vous avez fait du jogging avec vos amis. Now for some independent practice. It will be your responsibility to put the correct form of the passé composé of the verb in the upper left in the blank. La réponse correcte, c'est hier, Paul a lu un roman pour le cours d'anglais. Hier, elles ont écrit une composition de 5 pages. Hier, est-ce que Paul et Thomas, est-ce qu'ils ont compris les instructions pour la répétition indépendante? Hier, j'ai su que Thomas n'aime pas les oranges. C'est bizarre ça. Hier, nous avons reçu une lettre de Paul à Paris. Hier, Marie a dit qu'elle préfère les stylos bleus. Hier, est-ce que tu as été à l'école? J'ai remarqué que tu n'as pas été en classe. As a review, to create the past tense in French, you need the appropriate form of avoir and the ed form of the past participle of your verb. Typically, it's er to e accent aigu, re to u, and ir to I. However, there are a handful of verbs that have their unique ed form. And part 3 are a special subset of verbs that are even more regular and don't use avoir as their auxiliary verb.